And I can honestly offer that to everyone that I talk to. That in the back of my mind, I'm not thinking to myself, maybe this person's elect, maybe this person isn't elect. As I'm coming out of Calvinism and the verses that I believe really supported Calvinism, and I started seeing those verses, I imagine like a Jenga tower, and I've got all these verses, right, that are built, and as I'm taking them out, the tower of Calvinism is becoming more wobbly. But then at the same time, you have these other verses that that are just completely say God desires all to be saved. You're getting those put on top, and so the tower's starting to lean, and so then you get to this point, you're like, well, maybe I was wrong about all these other verses talking about God's desire for all to be saved. God, sending that John 3:16. Maybe all those arguments were incorrect before. So then you have all these other verses that you had pushed, that you had explained away as a Calvinist, come in on top of the tower as it's collapsing. And I remember coming up to my wife and I go, hey, because my wife was a Calvinist too. And so I remember going to her and telling her, I said, honey, I don't think Calvinism is true. I don't think I'm a Calvinist anymore. And she was like, okay. She was kind of like shocked about it a little bit at first. And so by God's grace, she trusts me spiritually. And so she said, okay, well, show me what you're seeing. Walk me through what these things that you're learning and explain it to me. And so that was really my first introduction, was a lot of these verses that in my videos are the things that I learned as teaching my wife and showing my wife how those verses didn't support Calvinism. And so, I remember her telling me, that would be awesome if it was true. And she had a lot of friends who went to the Piper seminar and got saved in college. And they're like, yeah, I love Jesus, but I really struggle with this Calvinistic part of it. And some people almost just said, no, I can't be a Christian if this is what Christianity is. Mm-hmm. And, looking back, there's a list of there's a list of people I would love to go and talk to now and say, yeah, it's not. That's not right. It's not right. And it's far better. God is so gracious, kind, and loving, and he is incredible. And let me explain. Let me show you these verses and how they don't support Calvinism. And that's kind of why I make my videos, and I think why you make your videos. And at the end of the day, that's my heart. That's my desire. Why I do what I do. It's not. I don't like fighting with people online. I don't like getting in debates with people online. It's not. It's not. I'm not. I don't want to do that anymore. And but what I want to do is put out good content that maybe there's someone out there struggling with this image and picture of God, and I don't want them to deconstruct their faith and go into atheism or walk away from God. I want them to know the true and living God as He's revealed through His Word. So,
that's the people that you're describing that are looking at Christianity, and I say it with air quotations, and saying, if this is it, if God is a God who, whether compatibilism or not, is determining, again, I think like you said earlier, if you follow through Calvinism logically, everybody, I just can't help but already hear all the, well, that's not Calvinism, that's not right. But okay, well, many Calvinists do. God determines, if you even go to John Calvin, who will talk about God is not only, allowing, but he's willing and authoring the not only the sinful actions, but the very desires, the inclinations of the heart that lead up to that. God is determining those, and then he'll say, but somehow mysteriously still, holding men accountable. This is a very loose quote, but I can share a link to the John Calvin. There's many like that where Calvinism, I think, followed through logically is fatalism. It is, and that's not a pejorative term. It's just, I think that's just an honest descriptor of what it results in. And there's so many people who look at that and say, I can't get on board with that, because I think objectively it's untenable. Objectively, it doesn't make sense unless and here's what when I hear Calvinists hear our arguments, and so often we'll say, well, you just don't understand Calvinism or things like that. What I think is behind that, what I can't help but hear, is basically them saying, well, you're not able to, jerry-rig your mind into holding contradictory information at the same time. That's what I think they're ultimately saying, because so often they won't take us 99% of the time, actually. When I get that accusation, you don't understand Calvinism, that's a straw man. You're not properly representing Calvinism. Almost every time I try to say, okay, well, can you, very respectfully, can you please specify what precisely was said in this video that is not true of Calvinism? 99% of the time, they'll make the accusation and they won't respond. They'll just say some, very often a hostile kind of quippy remark, for the most part. The ones who, and I just, I think I can't help but hear that as they see the problem. I think they recognize it, whether consciously or subconsciously, and they don't necessarily know what to do with it. They see it. Oh, that is a problem. They're not going to acknowledge it. So what are they going to do? They're going to say, oh, well, you just don't understand it. If I can just say he's just misrepresenting it, then I can just dismiss everything he said. I don't have to think about it. Now, if I'm challenged about what specifically, what is it exactly that he said that isn't true about Calvinism? Well, I hope he doesn't ask me that, because I don't really know. And so I just, I think it's, I don't know where I was going with that, other than to say that I think, these responses that come to these sort of things, I think underlying it shows this. I think that the contradictory nature of the system when, evaluated, and it seems like you began to see that, and for whatever reason got to a point where you were willing to not dismiss that, to not rush that under the rug, but to say, okay, I need to look at this. I need to look at this and sincerely evaluate if it can hold up.
I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this comment, and I'm going to try to say this with as much love as possible. One of the things that I have seen from atheists is they are arguing Calvinistic doctrines of God on the internet. And so it was only natural for me to be pushed into either solidifying my views on Calvinism or not, or walking away. And in my process, it was a 4-pointer, 3-pointer, 2-pointer. And so that's kind of how it naturally came to be, where I was addressing these things. And so that was part of the thing where I had to nail it down. Am I going to argue with atheists that Calvinism is true? Or am I going to argue with, and when I say argue, I'm in love. Am I going to lovingly discuss these issues with atheists and say no, and then that would lead into me arguing about predestination to salvation, to election, to that concept and picture of God, in that soteriology, and because then that flows into evil, and it flows into just the universe as itself. So all these things are tied in and wrapped in with each other, and that's kind of where that led into. And again, I was fine if on the other side of this that I ended up a 5.7 point Calvinist, if that's where I believe the scriptures taught. And but I wanted to know, because I'm now going to engage people online from a certain worldview of who God is and what I believe, who the character and nature of who God is. And I just found myself saying, now when I see atheist posts, it's usually, hey, I don't think that's not the God of the scriptures, and then that's where usually the engagement will happen. So that's how all these things are kind of tied together, that I've noticed in my own life, in just engaging, trying to share the gospel with people.
Yeah. Yes, I've seen that. I've seen Calvinism be a big hindrance in people. There's recorded examples of that on places like Apologia Studios, where you'll see Jeff Durbin and others debating with a Mormon, for example, and the Mormon will hit them back with their Calvinistic beliefs, and to me it's like, I don't know, where do you go with that? You just have to tell the person, well, somehow mysteriously you just need to believe that this is actually still presenting a good and loving God, that this is who are you, Amanda? I mean, it's just like, there's no, you basically just have to, at the end of the day, you have to gaslight, you have to turn that, I think, that question, which is just a misrepresentation of who the objector is in Romans 9 to begin with, but you have to turn that question back into almost like gaslighting the person who has an issue, which again, I think at base level, somebody having, an initial response of, well, that doesn't seem like that's presenting a fair, loving, good version of God. At base level, the Calvinist should at least be able to say, hey, that's a good question. That makes sense. I understand why you would feel that way. But here's some ways I think you can think about that. And unfortunately, it's so often the response is sort of a gaslighting, shaming. Well, who are you, a man, to answer back to God? You just don't want to submit to the truth of who the Bible reveals God to be, and just kind of nonsense like that. But but I've seen that. Calvinism it would be a very hard thing to carry with you in situations like evangelism sort of situations, and it would be something that I don't know how you would not just want to try to keep that under wraps. You're going to keep that one in the bag for the most part, because if you begin, it's one of those things you need to kind of keep hidden to some extent until the person is ready to really receive that. So.
Yeah. So for me, when I first got saved, I wanted to tell everyone about the gospel, and was sharing the gospel with anyone who would stand still for more than 5 minutes. But over time, I found in my own mind that I would start to say to myself, if I just need to tell them Christ died for them, and if they're elect, then God will use that to save them. And I'm not saying all Calvinists are like that. That's just where I ended up growing into. That's what ended up happening with me and my witnessing. And I know R.C. Sproul's did not do that. And I want to be honest about that. He would debate and argue those things. I actually went through a book by R.C. Sproul's about evangelism, which he makes some good points in that. But for me, I had gotten to the point where if they're elect, I will share the gospel, and God will use it, the means to bring this person to salvation. And so the depth of my witnessing and actually working through issues and problems and things that they were dealing with or fighting with, I found my evangelism was lacking. And whereas now I will sit down, just like what Paul would do, reason from the scriptures, reason from life and truth and those things, and have a conversation with someone. And even now with, with what's happening in the world, I'm, a lot of people are kind of down. I'm actually hopeful that people will see that as we reap what we've sown over the last 20, 30, 40 years, that it was not a good thing to move away from God as a people, as personally, as us, and that you can look at people and say, hey, if you head that direction, this is what's going to end up happening. And out of love, you can say, but there's a better way. Christ, living for Christ is going to be a fullness of joy that this world cannot offer. It's going to be a fullness. There is life and love and freedom and a relationship with God through Christ, and freedom from sin in Christ. There is all these things. And sure, it seems like it's fun and it's going to bring you this temporary joy, but you can see now, you can actually look at people on the internet and be like, look at where they started and look at where they're at now. And this was because they ran from God instead of running to God and finding reconciliation through the gospel. And I can honestly offer that to everyone that I talk to. That in the back of my mind, I'm not thinking to myself, maybe this person's elect, maybe this person isn't elect, maybe, and I've seen that affect the way that I share the gospel with people. And I see that, like, I sincerely believe that when I'm sitting down across from someone, that God is with me on my team, or I'm on God's team, sharing the gospel with someone, that the Holy Spirit is going to be convicting of sin, that God's going to be orchestrating things in their life to bring them to faith in Christ. And I can have some assurance of that.